Alrighty, good evening, folks. My name is Isaac Jacobs-Schwartz. Some people call me Birds by BIJS. You can call me whatever you want. Tonight's presentation is Feathers in Flight, and indeed a journey to the Neotropics. And if you've seen me present before or educate, really, I like to start generally to kind of set a context and frame the experience, and then we kind of dive into more case studies and specifics. So that's kind of how the flow will be this evening. Tonight's presentation will be hopefully 50 minutes flat, and then we'll leave about 10 minutes for Q&A after that. A little bit of background about myself. So I am Benny, and I do a variety of things, one of which is operate my Birds by BIJS brand. And so I do nature-inspired clothing to kind of catalyze conversations around birds and nature connection in a demographic that is, for a long time, was underrepresented in birding and in the outdoors. So that's one aspect. And then I also do like bird photography and like a little bit of video work. I offer like local tours and international tours. And then, like I said, I do the clothing. So here's like a bird and ecology walk I led for some peers in Oakland's Lake Merritt. Obviously a fantastic spot for birding, especially in the wintertime right now. Before the pandemic, I was pushing corporate enrichment programs to offer opportunities for basically companies and organizations to kind of foster and cultivate like a mindset of gratitude and mindfulness, kind of using birds and birdsong and intentionality as a catalyst for that mindset. But not really doing that right now. But today, what we're going to be talking about is the Neotropics. First off, let's define some terms. So what are the Neotropics? And well, to put it straightforward, they're defined as a range between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Neotropics is obviously like colonial in its origin, right? Assuming that these are new world tropics, as if there weren't people and birds and organisms existing here for thousands of years. So it's a slight misnomer, but it is currently used pretty widely. We could say the tropics of the Western Hemisphere, but for brevity, we'll continue to refer to them as the Neotropics, but it is important to recognize that there were and have been people living here for thousands of years. So it was just new to white people. All right, so what is important about the Neotropics and why are we talking about that? Well, if you're a birder, chances are you've daydreamed about colorful birds that either come to visit us here in North America in the summertime or the breeding season and return to spend a majority of their year on their wintering grounds in Latin America. And so for those of you who don't know, Central America holds roughly 1,600 species of birds, and South America roughly holds 3,400 species of birds. And together, I believe it equates to like roughly 50% of global avian biodiversity. I forget, honestly, if these are unique species that with no overlap, but there are many places where there is obvious range overlap. But in general, the Neotropics are extremely biodiverse. And obviously tonight we're talking about birds. So again, like we saw on the map, that's a pretty significant range between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So where the heck are we going tonight? Great question. Glad you guys asked. We have Trinidad and Tobago, Curacao, and Ecuador. Each of these destinations are similar in some regards, but also quite different in many other regards. And that's what we're going to dive into this evening. And tonight's first stop will be to the West Indies or the Caribbean and to Trinidad and Tobago. And just a reminder, any media you see in here without credit, I took, unless it's me in there, which there's a good chance somebody else took it. The second stop will be to the Dutch Caribbean, aka Bonaire. And then our third stop will be to the mega birding epicenter, Ecuador. So what do all these locations have in common? Like I said, we're going to start broad and dive in a little bit more specifically. So obviously they're all in the Neotropics. We already went over that, so please don't say that. But in a normal live presentation, I would invite folks to guess. So I'll leave you guys for about 10 seconds to think about what do these locations have in common, other than the fact that I obviously went to all three of them. Yes, young man in the front. The correct answer is they are all related or connected to the Andes mountain range. And so you can see this cordillera, like, or mountain range on the western side of South America. It's basically one contiguous mountain range until it gets up into this region of South America, where it splits into like 3 subcordilleras, which is part of the reason why it's very challenging to navigate through Colombia, because the Andes are very complex mountains and they split into 3 sub-ranges in this area. But you can see even using this orange coloration, the Andes actually extend all the way out into northern Venezuela, and part of Tobago, or part of Trinidad and Tobago, have underlying geology from the Andes mountains. So here's Ecuador, here's Bonaire, and here's Trinidad and Tobago. So again, I think another thing that's really important to go over is kind of understanding what is driving biodiversity in the neotropics, because those numbers are pretty astronomical. First and foremost, equatorial regions, they generally have uniform monthly temperatures, right? Like Rachel was alluding to, this winter in North America and California in the West in particular, we're having a pretty cold winter. We got a lot of rain and a lot of snow. But in equatorial regions, we generally have more uniform monthly temperatures. And so what does that do? Well, basically this lack of distinctive seasonality, like is found at other latitudes. We just don't have extreme temperature variations. And so there aren't animals that are forced to leave the tropics for these sizable migrations. Obviously, there are birds that breed in North America and then winter or spend the non-breeding season in the New World tropics, but they are not forced to leave the tropics due to extreme temperature variation. So there's more time basically for the animals to basically speciate and specialize, since they don't have to focus a majority of their time migrating out of the tropics. Another reason why there's such high biodiversity in the tropics is because at these farther extreme latitudes, we have what we call boreal from North America and austral from South America migrants fleeing these extreme seasonal variations, and then they pack into the tropics. And the last thing for general drivers of biodiversity in the neotropics that we're going to talk about tonight is that even at high elevations, there's still a relatively, the temperatures are relatively warm. And so, for example, in the Sierra Nevada, which is like the spine of California, obviously folks in Fresno know you guys are hop, skip, and jump away from the Sierra, right? Like at 14,000 feet or 13,000 feet, you'd be like stoked to see a common raven, or if you got lucky, you know, maybe a great crowned rosy finch, etc. But at 14,000 feet in Ecuador, you can see a litany of hummingbirds and other what we call paramo species. So per square footage, there's more birds packed into the tropics, even at these higher elevations. I know this is a lot to go over. So if you have questions, ask me at the end. Alrighty, so the neotropics are popping with birds and popping with biodiversity. Enter the Andes Mountains. The Andes Mountains are insane. As you can see in this photo, they're quite diverse. So we have like some very low kind of grassy kind of vegetative cover. And then just across this little drainage, you can see that there's more shrubby, more ericaceae, kind of manzanita sized shrubs going on. And then you can see this kind of like volcanic outcropping, like little dome thing. And then you can obviously see a snow-packed glacier covered mountain. And so obviously there's different environmental pressures and different like grazing regimes and animals that obviously impact the way the ecosystem looks, but this is just like one tiny snapshot of the Andes. And so to think about it kind of bluntly, the Andes are basically like a magnifying glass or a magnifier for biodiversity. And so first and foremost, the Andes Mountains, we're not always here, right? The Andes rose up a long time ago. I'm no math magician nor historiologist, but I do know that the Andes Mountains rose due to tectonic activity, the South American plate smashing into the Pacific plate, creating uplift. And so this served to actually create what we call a barrier, basically cutting off gene flow between this like flatland savanna, which is like the Amazon basin is predominantly flat, between this really dramatic uplift that isolated coastal South America from like inland South America. And so that's one thing that already created separation, which over time what we call drove speciation, right? We're not creating new species, it's natural selection and a variety of other factors that are creating that. And then even within the Andes, so if you've ever been to somewhere in South America, in the Andes Mountains, chances are you've flown into an airport that was actually located on an inter-Andean valley. So for example, like Quito and La Paz, these are basically airports that are situated in inter-Andean valleys, this flat area. And so just like we have like the Coast Range Mountains, and then we have like other ranges that go on beyond that, like, right, we have the Coast Range, like the outer Coast Range and the inner Coast Range, and then like the Central Valley, and then we have basically the Sierra foothills, and then it goes all the way upslope to obviously higher elevations, creating a barrier. So the same thing is basically happening in South America from the Andes Mountains, and it cuts off gene flow, and over time, more species basically are evolving. And so this is what we call allopatric speciation, right? When there's a physical barrier separating gene flow or habitat connectivity for species. So here's a little bit of a zoom in to kind of see what I'm talking about. They call this the Altiplano, which is the inter-Andean valley. And you can see on the key here, these are elevational kind of colors. And so obviously at the top is the lightest pink. And so you can see there's a pretty dramatic difference in elevation between the inter-Andean valleys and these like Western Cordillera and the Eastern Cordillera. So again, these are just basically the same factors, but different components in the Andes. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of the Andes and biodiversity amplification is that each of the Cordillera's inner slope is actually separated. Maybe I already touched on that part. Okay, the other part is that the Andes Mountains are extremely textured and extremely hard to pass through. Even like a space in between the fold in the mountain, like even on this level, there might be like subspecies. There's the separation could be so significant that the barrier to crossing over even a valley that's not across the Andes would leave species basically enough time on their own to develop unique traits and then speciate even further. So basically it's just like jumbling up all of these species over time, creating like insane biodiversity. Alrighty, so now that we've covered that, we're going to kick things off in Trinidad and Tobago. This is a little photo from Tobago. And for context, this is where Tobago is. You can see it's in the Caribbean. They also call it the West Indies. It's very close to Venezuela, as you can see here. And Trinidad and Tobago, I believe, has 472 species of birds reported there. So as far as neotropical locations, it's relatively low, but in terms of the size of this dual island nation, in comparison to these other Caribbean islands, Trinidad and Tobago actually has a very disproportionate number of species, and they have a lot more. And so the geology is partially from the Andes Mountains, and it's not exclusively karst topography or limestone, which is generally the underlying topography of much of the Caribbean, as well as what we call the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, which is where we're going next. And they're only 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela. So there's obviously some South American like mainland influence that has contributed to the biodiversity and species composition on Trinidad and Tobago. Alrighty. So for those of you who haven't been to the tropics, Trinidad and Tobago is actually like a great kind of intro spot because many of the neotropical bird families are represented, but the number of members that constitute each family is significantly smaller. So you can kind of test your ID skills and kind of get more familiar with some of these more neotropical families. But everybody's here for the bird photos and the bird story, so here we go. This is a copper-rumped hummingbird from the front. This is a copper-rumped hummingbird from the side. This is obviously a brown violet ear. This is actually like the least common violet ear species in Trinidad and Tobago, even though it's one of the more common violet ears in the New World tropics. A certain target for most people in Trinidad and Tobago is the ruby topaz. The black-throated mango is certainly not one to miss, and the white-necked Jacobin is also quite widespread on Trinidad and Tobago. Here's some close-ups. Who doesn't love the ruby topaz? My goodness. White-necked Jacobin. I don't know if I really love the name. I'll be totally honest with you guys. There's not a whole lot of white neck, kind of an undersell for how gorgeous this bird is. You can let me know in the comments what y'all think. Here's a rufous-breasted hermit. I talk a lot more about hummingbird ecology in my other presentation, which I think some folks have seen before since I shared it with you guys. Hold on one second. My audio turned off. We're back. Here's another cool one. This is a white-tailed nightjar. This is kind of interesting story. Basically, we were cruising the roads, taking some astro photos and just looking around. And this white-tailed nightjar was in the road. We could, you can't really see it, but there's a little bit of light in the eye here. And we used the vehicle light as a fill. And then I was like crawling on my stomach with my camera, basically as close as I could. And so the light was basically preventing the bird from seeing me as I got closer. And I basically got as close as I could until my focal length had reached its like focusing minimum, whatever. And I snapped a couple photos like that and obviously adjusted the light balance a little bit so it wasn't so yellow, but kind of a cool way to get challenging photos of a very flighty and cryptic species. And I encourage folks to try that at home in the summertime when you're cruising roads looking for capra-molgids, common poor wills and such. Another cool bird is rufous-tailed jacamar. We've got a lot to cover tonight, so I'm not going to go crazy on stories. This is the Trinidad motmot. This was once classified as blue crown motmot or blue diadem motmot or something like that, and then it became Lessons motmot after that species was exploded, I think, into 6 other species because of genetic differences. So now this is the Trinidad motmot, even though the bird is most readily seen on Tobago. Gorgeous bird, as you can see. One thing that I wasn't expecting to see actually during my time in Trinidad and Tobago were these blue and gold macaws. I spent a lot of time looking at my field guides and fantasizing over birds that I'll probably never see. My buddy Faraz, who's a fantastic photographer and guide and Trinidad local, I was like, oh, is it possible to see blue and gold macaws here? And he was like, yeah, it is. And so we got really lucky to see these birds in the wild or in their natural habitat. And one thing that was interesting is that in other places, there isn't the same value or protection put on native species, and especially birds as incredible as this. And this was literally just in like a residential area where these macaws hang out. And my buddy Faraz wanted to make a point to some of the locals who were driving by because we had our big lenses out and they're like, what are you guys up to? And he was telling them basically that I had come from California to see birds here and these were one of my targets. And so one way that we can leverage our privilege when we're traveling abroad is to basically request target species from our guides if you hire guides to see them, because they're interacting directly with the international ecotourism market. And I had a friend post this about Costa Rica. I was just there recently looking for targets, and one of the birds that I dipped on was a Nicaraguan seed finch, whose population has decreased significantly due to habitat loss and potentially also capture for the pet trade. So just kind of an interesting aside of like when you go abroad and hire local guides, let them know what you're looking for, because obviously like our international dollars have a huge impact on the local economy. And for anyone who's seen birding statistics, like birders throw down on the international ecotourism economy in a very large way. So continue to leverage your privilege for the overall conservation of birds and wildlife. Here's another awesome shot of a blue and gold. They're extremely gregarious and quite fun to watch. Here's another cool one. This is striated heron. For those of you who are wondering if that's a green heron, I was wondering the same thing. They're pretty tricky to tell apart. I think at one point they were combined as striated heron, and then they've since split based on their range as striated and green. I think there are some places where their range overlaps, but in this case, this was a striated heron. Another cool bird that I get to see out there was this lifer savanna hawk. We were cruising an agricultural area looking for birds, obviously, and this savanna hawk was rooting around in the disked field, and it had just rained and made for quite a dramatic photo. One of the top targets for folks on Trinidad and Tobago is the tufted coquette. This was photographed at Asa Wright Nature Center, which is currently frozen, not due to cold, but I think COVID has froze that place. So I don't know exactly what, but I filled out a survey talking about my experience there and any feedback, and hopefully it comes online soon again because it's a fantastic place for birding, and one of the best places to see tufted coquette. Also want to give this little lady some love. Most often male hummingbirds get a lot of attention, but the females also are quite fantastic to observe as well. Again, I spent a lot of time in my field guides, and before I went down to Trinidad and Tobago, I was like, Faraz, it would be great if I could see some scarlet ibis. Do you think that will be on the menu? And he was like, yes, dude, for sure. And then I asked, and I was like, but I was told to like go to this like one feeding area where you can see like thousands of them. He's like, yes, it's already on the schedule. I was like, okay, great. And he did not disappoint, and nor did these birds. So here is a little video taken from our boat in our tour. Right at sunset, these scarlet ibis come to roost, and they turn the mangrove island that they roost on into a poinsettia tree. And so what's interesting that I learned during this time was I was here during a Christmas bird count, and so they counted roughly 5,000 scarlet ibis. So that was a whole lot to see at one time. And the reason why they nest on this mangrove island is because in this part of their habitat, one of their primary predators are actually boa constrictors. And so by roosting on the island, it decreases the chance of predation. And they're also the second, I guess, most prominent predator is actually peregrine falcon, which is pretty crazy given the size of these ibis and the size of the peregrine, but they're gnarly birds, so they do what they can. Maybe one of the rarest birds I got to see during this trip was the Trinidad piping guan. And I was like, Trinidad piping guan, how many piping guans are there? Let's be honest, like, does it need its own name? Later on, I realized that there are more piping guans. Story to be continued during the lowlands in the Amazon. These species are actually critically endangered due to habitat loss. And a lot of birds that look like this taste like turkey. And so in a lot of countries where folks don't have access to the same resources, and in some places, United States, a lot of folks turn to bushmeat. And it's not for lack of, I don't think it's out of like, out of evilness, which oftentimes I think a lot of people conflate like blame, but more it's just a lack of resources. And so these birds and the environment basically takes the toll for lack of resources or lack of development for folks to access resources. So these pawe, as they're called, are critically endangered, and quite cool to see. And it's not always a guarantee, but we lucked out and we got to see them. And here's a little video footage of these guys. I didn't obviously clip the end of that video. Here's a close-up of the Trinidad piping guan again. They're really cool. I'm sure some folks here have seen chachalacas or guans in other places, but these guys are really, really cool too. All right, so we went from Trinidad to Tobago, and now we're going to Little Tobago Island. This is the site of Blue Planet. A segment of Blue Planet was filmed here, and I was very eager to return, or I was very eager to visit this site because there are about 5 species of pelagic birds that nest in these cliffs. We didn't get to see all 5 of those species, but we did get some great views of red-billed tropic birds, which breed here. And we also got to see, I think, brown boobies. So that was cool. And despite how many red-billed tropic birds were there, it was a little bit challenging to lock onto them given the distance and my autofocus capabilities. But I did persevere and was able to get some shots that I was really happy with. And one thing that's actually interesting about this place in particular is the relationship between these two birds. The magnificent frigate bird has quite a reputation. It's what we call a kleptoparasite. It's basically its primary form of gaining energy in the form of calories is by harassing other birds until they basically regurgitate their food, and then they swoop down and eat it. And so what they do is these magnificent frigate birds are like large soaring birds, and they have obviously what you can see is a high surface area to volume ratio, meaning that they can soar around without expending much energy off the ocean currents and the thermals. And so what they'll do is they'll circle around this area, and basically they will target red-billed tropic birds as they return to their nest to bring food to their offspring. Now, one thing that I found super interesting is that the magnificent frigate birds aren't just like rolling the dice and just going to waste their energy harassing one bird. What they actually do is they key into the bird's crop. And so this is like basically a flexible portion of like their throat that can expand when they have prey inside of it. I'm sure you've seen raptors or other large birds flying, and you can see, if you get a picture, you can see this like huge bulge in their throat. And that's because there's something in there. And so they key into that, and then they start harassing these birds like crazy. In some extreme cases, they actually will grab the streamers on the tail and swing the bird around until it is so agitated and so just like over it that it basically just regurgitates the food. And then before it hits the ocean, the magnificent frigate bird swoops down and grabs it. So they're pretty gnarly, but they're not the worst. They play a role in the ecosystem, and they're not exclusively kleptoparasites. They do sometimes do their own fishing. So just wanted to share both sides of that coin, as well as a plethora of dreamy red-billed tropic bird photos. Alrighty, so maybe you've had enough of Trinidad and Tobago, maybe you haven't, but regardless, we are transitioning to the Dutch Caribbean. And pay special attention to the change in habitat here, because like I said, on Trinidad and Tobago, it's much more forested. The underlying soil is much richer, and it's not limestone based. And so the geology supports vegetation, which supports birds. And so Bonaire, aka the Dutch Caribbean, has a very different environment here. You can see there's a mangrove in the background. We've got a tricolored heron and a pair of Caribbean flamingos. A lot of flamingos. Actually, Bonaire's airport is called Flamingo International. I think that's like the name for their airport, because this location is actually one of 4 breeding locations for the Caribbean flamingo. And I think there's about 4,000 birds that nest here and live here year round. So pretty fantastic to be able to observe these in their natural environment. I think up until this point, I'd only seen flamingos in the zoo. I do know there is one in San Diego, California, that's been hanging out for a number of years. So maybe you've seen that. I haven't seen Pinky, but maybe I will soon. But these photos were literally from the car on the road. So from a photography standpoint, the Caribbean is actually arguably too sunny, as opposed to most places in the New World tropics where you are starving for light. So kind of fun, keeping my ISO low and having fun shooting. Pearly thrasher, member of the mimid family, like mockingbirds and thrashers. A blue-tailed emerald, female hummingbird, blue-tailed emerald. A lot of folks who go to the tropics go to the feeders, which are totally fun, but it's also super rewarding to see birds in their natural environment. And the habitat on Bonaire is basically a mix between like Joshua tree scrubland and like African savanna. There's a lot of acacia, and there's a lot of really heat tolerant plants and water tolerant. And so as you can see, the environment is pretty harsh. This was an interesting shot. We were in the car cruising, looking for birds, believe it or not. And I saw this car like ripping down the road, and I just had like a couple seconds to like grab my camera and put it out the window, and I was able to take 3 photos. And luckily my settings were were perfect. And I was able to freeze this caracara in flight, and just felt very grateful for that moment. And a reminder for folks who are interested in bird photography and shooting manual to make sure to change your settings preemptively, so that when you pick it up, you're ready to drop some frames. Another really cool species found on Bonaire is the brown-throated parakeet. This is a near endemic, which means that it's not only found on Bonaire. I think it's also found on Aruba. But this is a really cool bird. Again, a little bit of a misnomer. And there's more things to be talking about than its brown throat. But these are wild grapes, not the ones that we have here in California, obviously, but these are tropical wild grapes. Speaking of tropical things, this is a tropical mockingbird. Looks strikingly similar to our northern mockingbird. And again, you can see really what the environment looks like with this acacia scrubland habitat. This was a cool one too. Again, more acacia in the foreground, and this little kind of wetland habitat. Obviously, I cranked up the settings a little bit to get some light in here, but this is obviously a Sora, which we have at home as well. One that we don't have at home is a Venezuelan troupial. This is in the Icteridae family. This is basically like an oriole on steroids. These guys are about 30 to 40% larger than most of the orioles that we see. This is a big bird. And normally I don't take photos, or I don't share photos from like man-made or whatever human objects, but this bird was really posed nicely, and I think they're magnificent. Obviously, they're not from the ABC Islands. They're invasive species from Venezuela, but quite gorgeous nonetheless. Another bird that's actually interesting. So there's a lot of overwintering things from North America, particularly Eastern North America, that you can find out there. Obviously, this is our East Coast counterpart, the American oyster catcher, doing its thing in the rocky intertidal zone. Obviously, we have reddish egret here in California as the range is continuing to expand. This was a red morph adult. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed that last section. And now we are moving to Ecuador. So I don't know why this map looks all pixelated, but this is Ecuador. And tonight we're actually going to be diving into 4 locations within Ecuador. We're going to be in the Paramo, we're going to be in the cloud forest, we're going to be in the Andean foothills, and then we're going to be in the Amazon basin. Now, for those of you who know nothing about Ecuador, or only some things about Ecuador, I believe Ecuador is home to, I forget the number now, maybe I have it written, like roughly 1,500 or 1,600 species of birds. So it's one of the top birding destinations in the world. And the habitat is extremely diverse. It's roughly the size of Colorado, which is pretty magnificent. If Colorado had as many birds as Ecuador, I might live in Colorado. So that being said, we're going to start from the top and work our way to the lowlands. And the point of this is actually to really demonstrate habitat connectivity and the interconnectedness between these regions, and that they cannot survive without the other. And we'll dive into that topic a little bit later. So this is the Paramo, El Paramo. This is basically defined as tropical alpine habitat. And so, like I said before, the habitat is diverse. It's made up of a variety of things, right? We can see on the ground, which are like a bunch of bryophytes or mosses and lichen, and liverworts and things like that, and then some more grasses, and then some more shrubs. This was just one view. And the Paramo is basically between around 9,000 plus feet and around 14,000 feet. And it's quite cool. And it does get a decent amount of rain. And like I said, even at higher elevations, you can still see some pretty magnificent birds, one of which is the sparkling violet ear, like we talked about before, violet ear. This is certainly, in my opinion, the most beautiful of the violet ears. There's like the lesser and the Mexican and blah, 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 but we're not here to get into AOU things. We're here to talk about birds of the tropics. Now, I literally never thought I was going to make it to the Paramo. Like I said, I spent a lot of time, weird bird observation anxiety. But I spent a lot of time reading pretty formative text on the New World Tropics called the Neotropical Companion. I'm not sure if anyone's read it, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's really cool. But I made it to the Paramo actually really early on when I was in Ecuador. I was volunteering at a birding and bird photography lodge called Tandayapa. And one of the guests that was staying there wanted to go look for giant hummingbirds, and he wanted to look for condor, and he wanted to set up his multi-flash to try and take pictures of the hummingbirds. But the only problem was he didn't speak Spanish and he wasn't sure how to get there. And so I spoke Spanish. I still speak Spanish. And so I was like, I'm happy to go. So I got a free ride to go like 3 hours away to the Paramo from the cloud forest to go see some amazing birds. And one of which that I saw was this giant hummingbird. And when I first saw it, I was kind of taken aback, because if there was a northern cardinal perched next to this bird, it would be roughly the same size. So this is the largest hummingbird in the world. And it's found from basically sea level and lower latitudes all the way up to like 14,000 feet. And I talked about this in a different presentation about hummingbird physiology, but basically they have extremely high levels of hemoglobin, which allows them to bind more oxygen in their blood, which allows them to persist at extremely high elevations, where, as you know, if you go into elevation, you jump in the Sierra, you drive for a couple hours, you hop out at 7,000, you try and go for a hike, you're a little bit winded at first. But I was surprised because this bird was flying like a swift. It was so massive, and the flight pattern was so different from most insect-like hummingbirds that I wasn't even sure that I was looking at a giant. And then obviously I was sure. One bird that I saw that I didn't think I was going to see was Andean condor. Not the best photo, but still a condor nonetheless. They're obviously our South American counterpart to the California condor, and they are equally impacted by lead poisoning and lead-based shot. So if you were a hunter, I'm pretty sure lead-based shot is illegal in California. So keep doing the right thing. One of the most ridiculous birds I've ever seen is hands down the sword-billed hummingbird. If you guys have seen Planet Earth 2, there's an amazing feature or amazing episode. I think it's called Jungles or Rainforest. And there's a whole segment with insane 4K slow motion footage of these birds, a variety of hummingbirds, including the sword-billed. This is the only bird whose beak length is actually longer than its entire body. And as such, it's the only bird that cannot, preen itself with its beak. And so instead it uses its foot to scratch and preen. And this bird has also been seen or has been observed using its very long beak to basically joust other sword-billed hummingbirds. And like I talk about in other presentation, this beak is co-evolved with large tubular flowers, and there's a lot of co-evolution that's happening between hummingbirds and neotropical plants, but that's beyond the scope of tonight's presentation, but just really cool. Here's another look at it perched. You can see that beak is just insane, and it didn't skimp on the iridescent body feathers either. So here's a bird with pretty much the exact opposite proportion. This guy's got a massive body and a much shorter beak. Obviously co-evolved to sip nectar from a very different type of flower. And if you spend any time in the tropics or looked into any neotropical field guides, the tanager section is ridiculous, many of which are found in what we call mixed flocks, which basically is a group of birds comprised of a variety of species all working kind of side by side or kind of in parallel looking for food. The scarlet-bellied mountain tanager actually is not one that's found in mixed flocks for the most part. A pair of these guys came down to this little feeder platform in the Paramo Highlands, and I really like birds that are white and black or red and black, and so this little heartthrob definitely got a couple photos. Rainbow-bearded thornbill, another amazing hummingbird, one of 133 species that's found in Ecuador. This was my last day. I was doing a little video segment and I was birding the Paramo to try and pick up my last kind of day targets. And I saw this little thing like whiz right by me. And I was in the car that I rented and I was like, what the heck is that? And I was like, I look out my window, I was like, oh my God. And it was on the ground. And I had my camera obviously on the seat next to me. So I pulled it out and like dropped some frames. And lo and behold, it was another one of those mythic birds that I was like, oh, this bird's too beautiful to be seen, or its range is so limited that I probably won't find it. But what I've been noticing more and more is that having less expectations around whether or not I will see it, but putting myself in the right position to see cool birds seems to work out pretty well. So this was a big lifer, and if you look closely, you can see kind of where the namesake comes from: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Rainbow-bearded thornbill, very cool bird. Another cool bird, this is the shining sunbeam. It looks good from the front, but even better from the back. I don't know if you guys have any friends like that. So this is a black-faced ibis. This bird is actually pretty widespread within its range in the Andes, and doing well. But in Ecuador, where there's not a lot of Paramo habitat, this species is actually, I believe, classified as near threatened. But much like, much like the ibises that we have, they're roughly the same size and their overall morphology is similar. But you can see they're foraging in a more of a dry meadow in the Paramo at a much higher elevation. And they have a pretty diverse diet. They're omnivorous. All right, so now we're going down slope a little bit further into the cloud forest. And this can be a really anywhere from 5,000 to 8,500 feet, or potentially even a little bit lower. And the cloud forest is interesting. Now, if you see here, there's clouds, there's forest, obviously. But what's so fascinating about the cloud forest is that the temperatures, like the cloud forest is defined basically by its precipitation levels and its temperature. And precipitation, for the most part, falls on a daily level, whether in the form of mist or rain. As the climate is continuing to change, it's more episodic patterns of heavy rain as opposed to like a daily sprinkle to continue to moisten the environment. But regardless, this ecosystem is very moist. As you can see, it's a lot of the vegetation is growing on top of other vegetation. These are what we call epiphytes. And so whether they're bromeliads or mosses, lichens, fungus, etc., these are all basically acting as sponges to absorb water when it comes down in the form of precipitation, and then slowly leak it out into the environment. And in the cloud forest, there's an overwhelming diversity of life here, from herps, including snakes, or including reptiles and amphibians, insects, orchids, the list goes on. Obviously, we're talking about birds, so we're going to continue on that. But basically, a lot of the water that's coming out of the Paramo creeks is going through the cloud forest in its rivers. And then those rivers are going to continue to go downhill where we're going soon. This is, for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to visit the cloud forest, it's basically creating its own ecosystem. And so what happens is, you can see the forest cover is incredible here in the Andes, especially at this latitude. But what's happening in the background is that there's actually clouds being created via evapotranspiration, which means that as the water is evaporating from the stomata of the leaves, it's actually creating clouds. And so when you remove rainforest, you're actually doing cloud forest, you're actually doing much more than just removing like physical plant matter. You're actually disrupting the overall water cycle. And so as habitats continue to get fragmented or continue to be saved, the appropriate impacts are made. So we'll get into ways that you can help the tropics a little bit later. But back to the birds. So masked trogon looks very similar to the elegant trogon we have here in Southeast Arizona, but it's different. Beautiful jay. Corvids are pretty insane in Latin America. It's a golden tanager. This is, I don't want to use the word trash bird, but This is a trash bird in Ecuador. Very, very common, absolutely gorgeous. It's crazy when you see a bird for the first time and then you see it 10 times later, how your excitement like diminishes, and then you take a year off and you come back to the tropics and it's like you're seeing your first love again. I had that experience recently. Velvet purple coronet. The colors are a little bit ridiculous here, and that's because the bird is a little bit ridiculous. This was a fill flash that I used to get the body to pop like that. But the bird overall is just like crazy colors of like purple and sea foam and green, and just a really, really cool bird. If you couldn't tell, I really enjoy hummingbirds. This is a green-crowned wood nymph. Photography is a whole different thing in the cloud forest, let me tell you folks. Very fun, very challenging. Empress brilliant, another of the 130 plus species of hummers in Ecuador. Booted racket tail, doesn't get cooler than that. Here's a nice headshot of a buff-winged coronet, very common within its range, quite beautiful nonetheless. Violet-tailed sylph, I mean, come on, that bird is just ridiculous. This is what we call a choco endemic, which is a small stretch of lowland Pacific rainforest that stretches from, I think, southern Panama into northwest Colombia into a little bit of Ecuador, and its habitat is being lost at an alarming rate. But again, we'll talk about ways to support that. So one of 28 choco endemic. So this isn't a country endemic, it's a biome endemic or a habitat endemic. Another really cool bird that I got to observe down there is crimson rum toucanet, member of the Ramphastidae family. Toucanet, I don't know if that's French or what, but in net like basically means small toucan, and whatever etymological origin that word is. Pale mandibled araceli. These are huge birds, and if anyone was unsure to this day that birds are dinosaurs, just look at these feet or go look at a American coot. They have very similar feet, except for the coots are webbed. Arasaris are crazy and toucans are crazy. If you're ever at a feeder array in the New World tropics and all the birds scatter, there's a good chance that there's a crew of either corvids or toucan families like arasaris or toucanets arriving, because these birds are like corvids in the sense that they're omnivorous, extremely omnivorous, and most birds are pretty flexible with their diet. Some are obviously like obligate feeders, which means they have very specific, things that they eat. But the pale mandibuled araceli, for example, will basically eat whatever can get in its mouth, which includes baby birds, fruits, lizards, frogs, snakes, bananas, whatever. And so despite that this bird was coming down to the fruit feeder, the other birds are like, cool, we're just gonna give you your space while you're over here. We don't want any trouble, which is fine for the araceli, so they can do their thing. Here's another member of the toucan family. This is the plate-billed mountain toucan. I believe this bird is a choco endemic as well. This bird up until recently was very challenging to photograph reliably. They were not coming down to feeders. And for those of you not familiar with what I'm talking about, in the New World tropics, there's a practice of feeding birds like we have here in North America, but a lot of the birds there are frugivorous, which means they eat fruit. And so there's famous places like the Arnall Observatory Lodge is like probably most people's first place seeing a fruit feeder. And a lot of birds like tanagers and euphonias and similar things come down to the fruit feeders. But these mountain toucans don't until relatively recently at this spot in Ecuador that I was fortunate to visit and observe these guys coming down and get a chance to photograph them. Here's a bird that wishes it was a different bird. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the toucan barbet. He's got the right colors, but the wrong beak and the wrong size, but nonetheless, quite a handsome bird. Here's a flame-faced tanager. Maybe one of the most beautiful tanagers in Ecuador that I was able to observe. You can obviously see where it got its name from. And maybe one of the most famous birds in the whole world, partly because of its ridiculous name, the Andean cock of the rock. A very silly bird. Again, another bird I never thought I was going to see. But these members of the Cotingid family are actually pretty easy to see if you know where to look. These birds perform together in a lek, where the male birds basically dance around, flap their wings, do pretty elaborate performances to attract females. And this is like a guys only situation. And there can be up to 20 individuals at a lek, which are predominantly found around riparian areas or like riverine habitat. The females just kind of, sometimes they'll arrive and they'll check out the scene from the outside and see what's happening. And then more often than not, it's one or maybe two males of the whole lek that end up mating. So it's very interesting relationship, and one to explore further if you're interested in lek behavior, like we have here in the Great Lake in North America with the sage grouses. Let's see what's happening now. All right, so we're making our way further down slope into the Andean foothills. It's a lot warmer, significantly more humid, but there is no shortage of beautiful birds here to observe as well, including the red-headed barbet. You can see some of these pin feathers kind of still coming in. This bird has a wide-ranging habitat going as far north, I believe, as Costa Rica. Another cool trogon is the white-tailed trogon. There's a lot to say about trogons and also a lot not to say. I think one of the things I find most interesting is that trogons are actually found throughout the globe and into quote unquote the old world. But what's so interesting is that all the trogons basically have the same morphology. They basically just have like a slightly different call, slightly different tail feather like arrangement under the undertail, and then basically just like different color combos. Trogons and barbets are actually globally distributed, which is basically evidence of continental drift and Pangea and over time isolation and speciation. Another member of the Cotingid family, this is a manakin, clubwing manakin. You may have heard about the red-crowned or red-capped manakin, I forget, like the Michael Jackson bird that like does all kinds of like moonwalking, elaborate dancing. This bird is a cousin of that, but instead of the elaborate dancing, the clubwing manakin actually flips its wings up like this. And the speed in which it does it is so fast that it creates like this clicking sound. And these birds do not perform in leks. It's just an individual bird that performs to attract a mate. So a lot of cool things to explore and dive into around manakin sexual selection and basically behavior. This is a Huira tanager. This is a cool one. Very interesting bird, kind of not really tropical in its colors. They're much more muted, kind of more like pumpkin spice autumn vibes, but a really cool bird as well. Pale-throated umbrella bird. What a bird, holy smokes. So I'd spent a lot of time in Costa Rica before coming to Ecuador, and rightfully so. There's a lot to see in Costa Rica, and Ecuador is like kind of the holy grails of birding. But any rate, I never thought I was going to see umbrella bird because they're so ridiculously hard to find in Costa Rica. If you saw my stories or my post recently, I did luck out and recently saw a bare-necked umbrella bird in Costa Rica. But this little lady was popped my umbrella bird cherry. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but you can let me know if it isn't. I didn't think I was going to see one. There's basically, I was on eBird and I saw one observation for a bird along this trail in the lowlands. And normally you have to go to a lek. And in Spanish, they call them pájaro toro, because the males have this very large, elongated, kind of fleshy, I don't know, projection skin that hangs out. So it looks like a cape for like a bull. And so or maybe it looks like the flap of a bull. So they call them pájaro toro. But at any rate, this little lady popped up in my search image and I was able to snap a couple surprisingly crisp photos despite kind of very bright background and a little bit of rain. So really liked the feel of that shot and was super grateful to be able to see an umbrella bird species. They're really cool. All right. So the Amazon basin, what to say, honestly, I'd spent a lot of time hearing horror stories about the Amazon. And, you know, when you think about the Amazon for a second, I'm sure a lot of things come to mind. Massive snakes, biting insects, mosquitoes, which is also a totally separate category from biting insects. Dark water, emergent canopy, extremely humid temperatures, oil spills, deforestation, lungs of the world. And the Amazon is all that and more. One of the things I didn't realize about going to the Ecuadorian Amazon was that it was more accessible than I thought, and actually much more pleasant to be birding in than I anticipated. And this view right here was maybe one of the most beautiful views I had during my entire time in the Amazon. This is like a little backwater section that's basically separate from the Amazon main part of the Napo River. So here's a little bit of a zoom out because the Amazon is massive. I think the Amazon is contained within 8 countries in South America. And that's huge. And the Rio Napo is one of the 9 kind of major tributaries that flows into the Amazon, the main Amazon River. And so that's where we were, was on the Rio Napo. And so for even more context, here is Ecuador, and here's Yasuni National Park. So this is like roughly where we were in this photo. Now, emergent canopy. This is a really interesting term that folks should know. And anyone who knows what emergent means, it makes total sense. But in this context, the emergent canopy basically means that the trees don't stop growing. They just keep competing, quote unquote, for light, as light is one of the most limiting resources in the tropics, especially in places like this where when a tree falls, another quickly grows in its place, so that the amount of light that's hitting the canopy versus the mid-story or like the forest floor is exponentially smaller on the forest floor than it is in the copa or in the crown or the canopy of the forest. And so to see some of the species well, you have to go to a canopy tower to gain perspective, because some of these trees can be like 300 feet tall. So good luck trying to identify anything from the forest floor if you're looking for canopy species beyond just sound. So that's a little bit of context of like what the overstory looks like. And now we're back in this backwater section on the Amazon floor. And this is a ladder-tailed nightjar. This individual was just really just hanging out, made for some nice photos in the sun. One of the things that we didn't mention was clay licks. Now, I had a pretty fantastic guide, and he put me on to all these great spots after I showed him my target list. And this is a clay lick, and a clay lick is a lot of things. And one of the things that it is very important for animals. And because there's essential nutrients and salts and clay that's found here to augment their diet, because a lot of the animals, including howler monkeys or jaguars and scarlet macaws and other parrots, come down to this site to basically get their clay supplements and drink this little bit of water. But it's also a very dangerous time because, just like I'm sure you've seen on wildlife programs like in Botswana or ponds in Africa, a lot of animals congregate there, and animals that are out in the open and on the forest floor are exposed to predators, but also exposed nicely with the lighting, if I do say so myself. Hard not to love these, so I threw in a couple pics. And here's a little time-lapse POV from my phone that I shot while we were cruising around this section of backwater. So as you can see, the environment is dynamic and quite dense, and sometimes the trees fall and block your way. I'm going to rip through these real quick because I have a strong message at the end. Black-capped Danicobius. These are crazy cool birds. They kind of look like tit babblers, old world stuff, but they're here in the new world. Here's a striated heron eating a freaking piranha. A piranha. I grew up thinking that piranhas were literally the most gnarly fish in the world. And they might be, but plenty of folks fish for them with hand lines and eat them. And plenty of folks like this striated heron fish for them with their face and eat them. So don't judge a fish until you see it in another animal's mouth. Another cool one, Kukoi heron. It's kind of like our great blue heron, but just a little different paint job. Roseate spoonbill. Obviously, we have those here in North America, but who ever tires of seeing these pink unicorns? Burrowing owl. So I think there's 26 subspecies or races or whatever they're calling them of burrowing owls in the world. This is one of them. This was interesting. These are what they call like islas, or like little islands along the Rio Napo within the river. So there are these like sand spit bars with a lot of zacate or like grass vegetation growing. And I spied this little guy or girl from quite a ways out, and I asked my guide, I was like, yo, is that a burrowing owl? And he responded he didn't know because he's never seen one before. This was a lifer burrowing owl, and my guide is literally from there. He's an indigenous bird guide from the Quechua community in the Amazon, and he'd never seen a burrowing owl in his whole life in growing up in the Amazon. So I thought that was kind of cool to be able to share with him, you know, my knowledge from home and put him on a lifer, because I was already a lot of lifers indebted to him. Another really cool bird, white-fronted nunbird. This one came out really well. I was enjoying shooting some astro stuff during this time period, and I was really looking forward to getting some shots of the Amazon night sky. And I lucked out. The clouds parted very briefly, and I was able to snap a couple photos. Hoatzin, these are very ancient birds. They're called stink turkeys. They smell horrible and they taste horrible, and as such, their population is doing a-okay. Here's another fantastic look at a Hoatzin. This is, I believe, a juvenile snail kite. You can see they have ridiculously long talons and a very uniquely shaped beak for feeding on apple snails. And this is basically shaped perfectly to pop them out of their operculum, which is kind of like that valve-like door that when the tide gets low or they're exposed to air, they can seal it up without losing water. Horned screamer. Crazy looking bird. I don't know why these images are so pixelated, but maybe they look less pixelated for you guys, but imagine it's perfect. Alrighty. So we've traveled quite a ways. We've explored some very diverse habitats. We've seen a lot of birds, and I'm not just a birder. I'm not just a photographer. I don't just think I'm funny. Other people do too, I've been told, but really at my heart, I'm extremely interested in helping provide folks with transformative and educational experiences so that we can continue to do necessary work to safeguard this planet for the future. And so one thing that I think is critical for folks to understand is this interconnectedness. And I touched on this a little bit in the beginning of the presentation, but these are obviously bird migrations in the Americas and from National Geographic. And it is fascinating to see that some of these birds are literally connecting ecosystems from Alaska to Argentina by flying. And so the point of this conversation is oftentimes I hear people saying like, oh, our birds are back, and they're back. But in North America, we have 4 flyways, right? Pacific, Central, Mississippi, and Atlantic. But these birds, like the hermit warbler, who breeds here in the Sierra. You can go with Rachel to go see it, I'm sure. Swainson's thrush, right? Breeds, I'm not gonna explain it, you guys can see the range maps. But winters here in Latin America. Northern water thrush, another example of a widespread breeder in the northern latitudes of North America and along the northeast. Winters in the blue area. Townsend's warbler, winters in the blue area, breeds in boreal regions. Blackburnian warbler, boom, breeds in the northeast, winters in South America and in parts of Central America. Summer tanager breeds in southern latitudes of North America, winters in kind of more moderate tropical climates. But the most fascinating thing that I think a lot of folks misconceive is that they're not really our birds. These birds, basically, these neotropical migrants that return to North America to breed, they're basically come back to party and raise chicks for like 4 months, 3 to 4 months, and then they zip right on back to the tropics, where they spend anywhere between 7 and 8 months there. So arguably they're spending roughly twice as long on their non-breeding or wintering grounds than they even do in North America. And so that's just something to understand, because I think a lot of us in North America kind of have like a Eurocentric kind of perception, and rightfully so. We kind of are told to think that, but I'm not going to get on that pedestal. But what I am going to talk about is, where did our birds go, right? These graphs came out a couple of years ago, but they're still relevant today, right? We've had a huge loss of migratory birds. And so my point here is that there are ways to support birds. One way is to drink shade-grown coffee. I don't know why these are so pixelated. I apologize. Normally it's not like this. Drink shade-grown coffee, which basically means coffee that is not grown in clear-cut forest, but that much of that, or a certain percentage of the habitat, remains. And so obviously birds need habitat. We can reduce our plastic use. You can do citizen science, like going on eBird or iNaturalist. You can make windows safer by putting like UV or little decals or things like that, so the birds don't crash into them. You can definitely keep your cats indoors. I know a lot of birders who love cats, and a lot of fantastic birders keep their cats indoors, because these two subjects right here are actually the top 2 culprits of bird decline in North America. Using native plants, there's literally nothing cooler than transforming your suburban or wherever you live landscape to include regionally appropriate native plants. And obviously everybody knows not to use pesticides, but I will say it again. And the last thing, how else can we help? So these are all really fantastic organizations doing excellent work. And so in North America, the point of showing those range maps and how birds are migrating across spaces is that I think birds are an incredible catalyst for conversations. Birds don't have borders, right? Like, you saw those range maps. It wasn't like, oh, we don't go to Nicaragua, but we go to Honduras, right? Like, it has nothing to do with that. And so I think birds are a great way to connect humans across space. And especially at a time when America is so divided, I think it's important to remember that we can continue to unite, because a lot of these birds wouldn't be able to return, like the black-pole warbler that I observed in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador, and I also observed a breeding male in Alaska that same year. So without the work of these fantastic organizations, the habitat that these either neotropical migrants rely upon for 2/3 of the year could disappear. Obviously, we see what's happening in Brazil, where the rainforest is being auctioned off or intentionally burned to produce, to grow cows or soy. These organizations, I encourage you to take a screenshot or take a picture, and leverage your privilege. Donate to them. Save the Choco does amazing work. I mean, all of these organizations are top notch and really, really fantastic. So remember, our birds are inextricably linked to the health of the environment across time and space. And again, this is just a case study for the interconnectedness of the globe as a whole. I'm out of time. I'm Birds by BIJS. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure you guys were laughing or smiling at some point. If you weren't, don't tell me. I'm just kidding. But thank you all for your time. Hopefully you had fun, and I'll be quiet and open it up for some questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Benny. I'm going to just kind of hop in the chat here to see if anyone has dropped any questions yet. And sometimes it takes a few minutes. So while we're waiting for people to ask questions, I'm going to give you give your Instagram a little bit of a plug here. If you jump in the chat right now, the last comment that was put in there was from me, and that was me plugging Benny's Instagram. If you're on Instagram and you're not already following Benny, you definitely need to. His profile is awesome. A lot of great posts, a lot of really entertaining and informative stories. So, sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, yeah, definitely follow Benny on Instagram. I put his Instagram handle in the chat. I can add that again if anyone didn't catch that, but it's at Birds by Bee-jus. Yeah, great profile. Like I said, really entertaining stories, really entertaining posts, very entertaining and educational. So it's awesome. And I see that we have our first question, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into that. Just one moment here while I pull that up. This question, so we actually have two comments. Eileen says, thanks for the great presentation. Steven says, that was rad, Benny. And Ron Martin has our first question, and his question is, has the Amazon extinction rate ramped up during the Bolsonaro presidency? Benny, if you're talking, I think you might be muted.
Okay. Yeah, my privileges were not enabled, but here I am. Has it ramped up? Yes, it's basically, I try not to watch a whole lot of news, I'll be totally honest with you guys. But yes, when I was watching the news, there was, yeah, it's basically like Trump of Brazil. I don't know if anybody here likes Trump. If you do, that's totally fine for you. But regardless, the impacts in the environment were pretty much the same. In Brazil, yes, yes. The short answer is yes, yes, big time.
Okay, let's see if we have any other questions as of yet. So we don't have any other questions. Again, we did have someone ask for your website information to be put up again, which it looks like you did. So Andrew Newmark says, nice work, Benny. Thanks for all that you do.
Thank you, sir.
Let's see here. Okay, looks like we had another comment or question come in. Oh, here we go. Is the Amazon disease that killed Theodore Roosevelt better understood today?
I don't even understand what killed Theodore Roosevelt, so I don't think I could accurately weigh in on that topic, but now I am curious. Does anybody know about that one?
I wish I did, because that's news to me.
Ron, do you want to share what your thoughts are on the Amazon disease that killed Theodore Roosevelt?
Yeah, you could do that either in the chat or we can get you unmuted, whichever is easier.
I think the host has disabled unmuting for participants. So if we,
yes,
here we go.
I heard on a documentary that Roosevelt took a trip down the Amazon River and he caught a tropical disease, and 8 years later he died as a result of that disease. And I don't know that I don't know what it was. It was just, I know there's a lot of diseases down there in the Amazon.
Yeah, it could have been something like dengue fever that doesn't like kill you immediately, but can like slowly do that. I don't know. I luckily haven't gotten a lot of things from the Amazon other than good photos, so and great memories. So I consider myself lucky. But now I'm gonna look it up, honestly.
That's great. You can protect your health down there.
Yeah, it's actually not crazy. Like I said, the Amazon was more inclusive than I anticipated. Obviously, it's like hot and humid, and like you saw the photos in the perspective of like, you know, from a photography standpoint, and obviously like the canopy is quite high. But all of the lodges and all the places that you stay at, like they all have like mosquito nets like that go over the bed. And so before you basically like crawl into your bed, and then there's like a hanging piece over with the net, and then you just like tuck in the corners underneath the sides of your bed, so that nothing can get in. You wear long sleeves, long pants, and you wear rain boots, so you're pretty protected, honestly. Obviously some people are predated upon by mosquitoes or whatever more than others, but you don't know until you try. Oh, Linda weighs in with Theo Rowe died from cardiovascular disease. All right. Cool. Linda with the Theo Rowe obituary information.
All right, does anyone else have any other questions? All right, here, we'll give it just a moment here. I'll kind of give my little conclusion, and if anyone else wants to throw in another question, that's perfectly okay. So thank you again, Benny, for the wonderful presentation. We certainly appreciate it, and thank you to everyone who attended. If you're not already, please follow Fresno Audubon on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. We also have our YouTube channel that we've relaunched. And if you know of anyone who missed this meeting, or if you have missed any recent general meetings, we have all those up on our YouTube channel, so check that out.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, we do hope that you guys, Benny, yes, we'll send you that link too once we get that posted, so you can share it as well.
Cool.
We do hope that you guys will join us for next month's general meeting, which is scheduled for February 8th, if I'm not mistaken, and Dr. John Eady will be talking to us about wood ducks. So stay tuned for an announcement on that event. And stay tuned for an announcement and for links to registration on that event. Those should be coming via email and also via our social media. And before I officially sign off, I'm going to check the chat one more time. Looks like we don't have any additional questions. So thank you again, Benny, for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Those pictures were superb, to say the least. And thank you again, everyone who attended. So have a great remainder of your week and stay safe out there. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rachel.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.